Hello, welcome to Revive and Rise. I'm your host, Melodie Parrish, and I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited about September. The theme for September is learning challenges and neurodivergence. And what an awesome topic that's going to be. I'm so excited about the discussions we're going to have. We're going to share stories. We're going to have share tips and strategies, techniques, and therapies, all to help individuals that may have learning challenges or neurodivergence. And so I want to dive right in, and I want to talk. I went to an art festival this past weekend, and I was just so amazed. I love art festivals. There were hundreds of artists there, and there were so many different media that was used: paint, pencil, pen, paper, sculpture, metal arts. There was even a young lady that used recycled instrument strings to make her art, and it was beautiful. And fabrics, there's just all these medias that are used, and all these different pictures and art that will express the artist's feelings and thoughts and perceptions. And it's amazing. You talk to the artist and you hear the story of the painting, what inspired them. And sometimes you feel that same thing, but sometimes you feel something totally different, and you've interpreted it a totally different way. And it's just so amazing to see all the differences and all the things that all equal beauty in some form or fashion. And when I was there, I was thinking about this topic, and I was thinking of how to introduce this topic. And I thought, this is the perfect idea, because that is exactly what learning challenges and neurodivergence are. They're just a different wiring of the brain. That's all it is, a different wiring. It's the same person, slightly different. A human being with a brain that interprets and processes things differently. And it's all beautiful. We're all unique. We're all different. And what's really beautiful is when you take all of these different forms and ideas, and the way people behave, and the way that people process things and understand things, and you just weave them all together in beautiful colors and textures, it makes a wonderful tapestry of life that is brilliant and vibrant. And that's just the best thing. We're all different, yet we're all the same. We're all a work of art. And I think that's so important for us to realize and for us to understand as we're diving into this topic and this discussion, because understanding is the first thing that we have to do. I think it's so important. Understanding and then acceptance. And once you do that, I think things will be so different for you. Your life will be so much easier. So I'm going to share my story, and then we'll have some discussions about the next guest, the guest for next week. So when I was younger, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, right? And there was little known or understood about learning challenges. and neurodivergence. I never heard that word until my later years of life. I didn't understand what it was. Nobody ever said that. And so I remember I grew up in a small town. I can't say how things were everywhere, in the world, but in our small rural towns, those people with learning challenges were either isolated in their very own classroom or they were placed in the trailers behind the school. One or the other, but they were secluded. And so I can't imagine what that must have felt like growing up. It just screams to you that you're different. It screams to you that there's something wrong. Like, why am I not able to play with the other kids or to learn with the other kids, being in class with the other children? There must be something wrong with me. Those kind of ideas had to come up into those students' heads. And I never remember us ever interacting. It was always separate. It was kind of an us and them kind of idea. And, those children with learning disabilities, they also sat at their own table. It wasn't like they intermingled at all. They had a table that they sat at, and that was their table. And maybe that was for the teacher to keep an eye on them, or maybe that was for the teacher to keep her class together. I don't know. I mean, I can't 100% say, but I know that those children did have a table where they sat. Those children did have a room where they went, or a trailer where they went. It was as if they were secluded from everything. And, as adults, sometimes when we look back on our lives, we wish we had made different choices. We wish we had done things differently. And I can honestly say that looking back on especially my elementary experience, I would definitely do things differently. As in, I would definitely reach out to some of those students that were so isolated. I would reach out to them. I wouldn't wait on the school or the principal or the teachers or whoever to say, well, these students can come together. These students can meet together. These students can play together. I would approach them if I had it to do over again. Because maybe that would have helped them to see that they weren't. There wasn't anything wrong with them. It may have changed how they felt about themselves in some form or fashion. But when you're a child, you don't think about those kinds of things. I wish I had. But now I'm going to talk about my story. And my story, as many people know, I have a traumatic brain injury. I acquired this injury when I was 23 years old, which I'm very thankful for because the neuroplasticity of the brain at such a young age helped me to be able to make as drastic of a recovery as I did, or as I have. But those first few years after my injury were so brutal and so difficult. It got better with time, and as I was able to adapt myself, but it was still difficult, and it continued to be difficult. And there are things still now that are difficult for me that stem from that injury. But in those first years, I wish I had known. Nobody sat me down and explained to me what happened. I knew the basics. I got in a car accident. I had a traumatic brain injury. That was it. It wasn't until my early 40s, over 2 decades later, that I decided to sit down. I went out and searched for my medical records, and then I sat down and I read them. And I read what happened to me. I read the parts of my brain that were damaged. And then I looked up what effects that had, what changes that would have, what challenges that would create. And it all made sense. I was able to understand myself. I was able to understand my challenges, my behaviors, my emotions. I was able to understand why these things were happening. And I think that's so important. If you have learning challenges, if a friend has learning challenges, somebody in your immediate circle, a family member, a child, what needs to happen is you need to understand what has happened, what these challenges will be, what these challenges can cause. Because without that information, things can become very difficult and a great big struggle. I think about that often. If I had just known, if I just had the ability to know and understand, that those whole first years after my injury would have been so different, because I would have been able to ask for accommodations, to make adaptations, and it wouldn't have been such a surprise. Because in my mind, this was the new me, and I just had to deal with it. And that was the attitude, right? Because it goes back to when I was raised in the 80s and 90s. We didn't talk about those things. We didn't accept those things. There was so much shame in those things and guilt in those things. I had so much shame inside of me because of my condition that I just couldn't face it. I didn't talk about it. I just wanted to forget it. So I never talked openly about my brain injury until maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Not openly. And that it's been so freeing for me to be able to say, oh, I have a traumatic brain injury. These are some of the things that I do because of it. It's been so freeing for me to be able to talk about it and not hide it and not want to change it and to not think I'm so terrible. For a long time, because I didn't understand what was going on, I held a bar for myself that was unattainable. I set a standard of what I was before, and that was the standard that I reached. reached for. But that was also a standard at the time that I would never be able to reach, never be able to grab. And so what ended up happening was I ended up working so hard. And that's the thing. There's that phrase, the harder you work hard at something and you'll accomplish the goal. Not always. Not always, because I worked extremely hard to be able to do the things that I once was able to. And at that time, I just couldn't. I just couldn't. It was not physically possible. And so I ended up for a long time being like a hamster on a wheel, constantly working, constantly running towards something, wanting to go forward, but unable to. I just wasn't able to. So I constantly ran, constantly worked, and nothing. What I had to learn, though, and it took me a long time to learn, was the patience and the pause. You know, we live in a society right now, a world right now that has instant gratification, and that's what we want. We expect things now, but that's not how things work all the time, especially with your health, be it physical or mental health. It just doesn't work that way. I'm trying to learn that, and I'm trying to accept it, and I try every day. Sometimes it works. Sometimes I still get frustrated. But I had to learn that you work hard at a goal, but then it's okay to step back, pause, and take a rest, take a break. And then once you've recharged, then go and continue to work hard until you get to your next level, and then pause, and then take a break, and then rest before working again. It's not just an uphill battle. Sometimes there's steps. And so that's what I had to learn, because just like the hamster in the wheel who wants to go forward and keeps running and running with no forward movement, but if the hamster just takes a step back, takes a step out of the wheel and pauses for a moment, then the hamster can run straight ahead, run to the side, run wherever it wants to, but it's not in a circle. But it takes that pause. It takes that step. We have to make that step. And I'm learning that. So to anyone that gets frustrated that their situation may be difficult, isn't changing, isn't moving, just be patient. It'll happen. But it won't happen unless you understand the root cause. The next thing that I think is so important is acceptance. And we have to be able to accept ourselves. And that brings me back to the 80s and 90s and the students that had learning challenges or neurodivergence. You know, I'm 100% positive they didn't accept themselves and their state of being. I'm 100% positive that they didn't accept the way they processed, the way they thought, the way they learned, the way they perceived things. And if we can't accept things, then we can't move forward. If we can't accept ourselves the way we are, and be able to give grace to ourselves as well as to others in our life that may be going through similar things. But if we don't accept and offer grace to ourselves, then we can't move forward because we're tied up in the past and we're tied up in the struggle. The struggle has us tied in knots and we're not getting out because that's all we can think about. We can think about what we should be, how we should do it, what society says is the standard that we should reach. Or not necessarily society, but what we ourselves decide is the goal for us to reach because of one thing or another. It can be either of these things, but they hinder us from moving forward. So once I accepted myself and I understood why I was having these challenges, then I was able to make more accommodations for myself. I should back that up a little bit. I made the accommodations for myself before I accepted myself. So let's go back. Those first few years, I'll share another story or an adaptation that I had made. Those first few years, my memory was very, very bad. My short-term memory was very bad. And it was I never could pinpoint like certain things, that groups of things, the reasons that it happened. It just would happen. But I would constantly lose things. And it wasn't just like I would put it somewhere and then, a couple days later I wouldn't remember. I would put it somewhere and within 5 minutes, I would have no idea where I put it. And this would be papers, this would be other important items that I would set somewhere, and then I would spend hours looking for it, sometimes days looking for it, because I had no idea where I put it. However, in my mind, I had put it in a place I would never forget. So that's why it never occurred to me that it could be lost. And so what I did was that I got a box and I labeled it a place I'll never forget. And so then I knew that if there was something important, just to put it in that box, just to put it in that place that I'll never forget. And then I also knew I wouldn't necessarily remember that I put something in there, but I knew that would be the first place that I should look. And that really helped me to be able to find things in those first couple years. That's gotten significantly better, greatly better. But in those first few years, that really saved me. And just those different kinds of things, I would highlight material, just brief words or phrases that were important, not necessarily concepts, but just brief words and phrases, because at that point, that was all my mind could handle. And so when these things were important in notes or in books or in things, I would just highlight that word. And it would just trigger something sometimes. It would just trigger an idea or trigger a concept or trigger a thought that would hopefully help me. And so I would do these different things, but it wasn't. And then I just went through life. This was just me, and this was how I had to deal with things, and this was just the luck of the draw. This was what happened, and now I have to deal with it. But it wasn't until later that I started to accept it. And once I accepted it and I accepted that I needed help, then I was able to ask for the help that I needed. And being able to ask for help that you need is very empowering. It builds your self-confidence. It gives you a sense of power when you can ask for what you need and not just be told what you need. Or, sometimes certain places or learning facilities or whatever it may be, they just give you accommodations, sometimes that you don't even need. And you're just like, why do I have this? But, they just generalize it and give it to you. But it means so much more to you as an individual if you're able to ask for what you need. And I think those kinds of things are very important. And sometimes I look back and I wonder if those students with the learning challenges when I was younger, if they even knew what to ask for. Because I feel like they were given such a disservice because they just weren't well accommodated, and people just weren't very empathetic at all or compassionate at all. So I think all of these things will be able to help individuals. At least, I'm sharing my story. Hopefully something I've said will help, or at least help you feel like you're not alone. So talking about our special guest next week, I'm so excited. He is severely dyslexic, and yet he shares his story and talks about how he has been able to make accommodations, and he's had a great wealth of support around him and in his life that have enabled him to be successful in life. And he owns his own very successful business, promoting different people and things. And it's very inspiring, his story. It's a story of resilience. It's a story that shows what care and support can do for an individual. And so I'm so excited to share those things and to dive into a deep discussion. But then you have the other side. Not all of us get a strong support system. Not all of us come from families that are able to offer great support for various reasons. And there's a ton of reasons why. And nobody's blaming anyone. But some of us don't receive the support we need. And so when that happens, it can have detrimental effects. I have many friends in Charleston that live on the streets. And I've spent a lot of time chatting with them, talking with them, listening to their stories. And for many of them, they had learning challenges in school, and that's where it started. And then, that just spurred them being misunderstood and not good enough and called stupid and lazy and such negative talk to where that's what they believed about themselves. Then because of their learning challenges, they weren't presented with the proper accommodations, and therefore they either struggled through school until they dropped out, or they became such behavior problems that they got expelled out of school. And then it just downward spiraled, because if you have troubles communicating, whether written language or spoken language, if you don't know that, or if your employer doesn't know that, then jobs can be very difficult for you. They can be very difficult to get, but they can also be very difficult to keep. And if you don't have a job, unfortunately, in this country, then you're not able to support yourself. And what happens? You can't feed yourself. You can't clothe yourself. You can't provide a home for yourself. There's so many things. And then that can also lead into addictions of various kinds, drug addiction, alcoholism. It can lead into rage and violence. It can lead into so many different things that all stem from one thing that was just misunderstood, that was just not acknowledged, that was not supported, that was not accommodated. Unawareness is the biggest problem in a difficulty. Unawareness, not being aware of something, not knowing, lacking the information that can help you. So we're going to talk about now, just take a minute and have some brief statistics about dyslexia. I found this very, very interesting. This is just very brief. But statistics say that as many as 20% of the population have dyslexia. So it's more common than we think, or than I thought. And so it's really important for us to understand, just the broad brush definition of having difficulty reading, but there's so much more involved in that. Like, what does that mean, having difficulty reading? Well, it's a neurological disorder that prevents the ability to form words in the correct order, to use words in the correct order, use letters in the correct order. Sometimes you reverse the word. Sometimes you reverse the letters. And it makes it very difficult to read and write, for that matter. And try it sometime. What if you read something that's supposed to say, I ate pizza for lunch, but it's to a dyslexic person, it is, I lunch ate pizza for. It just doesn't make sense. Or if the letters are so reversed that you can't make out the word. So back when I first acquired my brain injury, I had severe problems processing information. And this made it really difficult. This made life in general really difficult. I'm not saying I couldn't do it. It was just difficult. And it was a struggle. And so I think about individuals with learning disabilities or learning challenges, but especially with dyslexia and the reversed words and letters and the confusion that it creates. How are you to process that? How are you to make sense of that, of any of that? And when you have severe dyslexia, that's very debilitating. If you think about it, we read all the time. And if we're not reading, we're listening. You know, you have street signs with letters. You have so many different things with letters. Other signs, books, newspapers. There's so many different things with letters. And if you can't read, it makes life pretty difficult. I mean, sure, there's ways to do things. If you see a red octagon, that's a stop sign. But there's so many different things that could happen that you need to know the word stop for the stop sign. And so when we talk about technology and ways to help accommodate learning challenges, and specifically dyslexia, what I find fascinating now is that the technology, you have audiobooks that are so prevalent now. It's not just audiobooks, but you have technology that you can put a letter into the apparatus and it will read it for you. You can put a book in there and it'll read it for you. You can put a note in there. You put anything in certain apparatuses and they'll read whatever it is there for you. And likewise, you have text to voice. You can write things and then there's technology that'll read it for you to speak. Talking about the inability to speak, there's several different things. There's communication boards where you push buttons and pictures to communicate words, ideas, and phrases. It's remarkably amazing the technology they have today. And I think about if these technologies had been present when I was younger, what a difference it would have made in those people's lives. And I guess we can always say that every decade or every century or every whatever large amount of time, but I was just thinking of that the other day, specifically. And so I just want to wrap up today in this brief discussion. We're definitely going to dive in deeper next week with our special guest. And I just wanted to say, we need to be more accepting. And I see how the world is now, and I see how the world was when I was younger. People now are more accepting of things and more open about things. And it's such a joy to see. the younger generation, sometimes you'll hear them say, oh, I need a mental health day. So I'm going to tell my boss I need to just take a mental health day tomorrow. You'll hear people openly say, oh, I go to a therapist. You'll hear people say openly, I'm overwhelmed. I need things to calm down for me. I need to do this for a few minutes to calm myself down. You'll hear people say, oh, I need a little more time to do this. This is very challenging for me, and it takes me a little more time to accomplish this task. You know, all these different things you hear, and it's accepted. It's accepted. And it's so wonderful to see. It's so wonderful to see. And I think we just have to understand each other. And we just have to accept each other. And we have to think before we jump the gun and say, you know, this person is having this problem, or this person's doing this, or what's going on with this person? What's the matter with them? You know, we need to stop and think, what happened to this person? What challenges are they facing? What could be something that I could do to help them, to help prevent their struggle, to help lighten their load? That's what we as human beings are here to do, lighten each other's loads, right? We're here to help each other, not alienate each other, not go on this extreme us and them mentality to where we're scared of each other or we're angry with each other. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to accept each other and to love each other for who we are and how we're wired. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope I said something that will help you or that'll make you think about some things. You can always reach out to me. My email is 8monthsofhell. That's after my first book. And I'm on Facebook, Revive and Rise, or Instagram is 8monthsofhell. So just reach out if you want to talk, if you want to discuss anything, if you have any questions, if you just want to start a discussion or a conversation, feel free, reach out. And just remember that whatever you're going through, whatever you're struggling with, you do not have to struggle alone. Have a wonderful day.